Hospitals after midnight feel like the world's lungs, breathing for people who can't. Antiseptic stung the back of my throat. The floor shone too clean under fluorescent lights that never dimmed, and every sound carried farther than it should have. A gurney rolling, a monitor chirping, a nurse's shoes whispering past the curtain. My son lay beside me, 11 and suddenly older, his fingers curled tight around the edge of the blanket like it might slide away if he let go. My name is Brooke. I'm 32 years old. We had been hit by a drunk driver. That sentence didn't settle at first. It hovered, unreal, like something you read about someone else. The impact replayed in fragments. The crunch of metal, glass skittering across asphalt. The way my body moved without permission to shield him. After that, there was only light in hands and questions asked too quickly. When the nurse stepped back and said we were stable, I reached for my phone with hands that shook more from aftermath than fear. I opened the family chat and typed carefully, choosing words that wouldn't alarm anyone more than necessary. We're in the hospital. Alive but shaken. I pressed send and watched the message slide into place. A blue bubble. Delivered. Nothing came back. Minutes stretched. Then an hour. I stared at the screen, refreshing without meaning to, listening to my son's breathing even out, counting it the way you count steps in the dark. I told myself people were busy. Phones die. Notifications get buried. Excuses lined up neatly because that's what you do when you've been trained to make space for others' lives. A memory drifted in, me at 17 calling home after a late shift, being told everyone was asleep and to talk tomorrow. Tomorrow is a soft word. It absorbs a lot. By morning the ward smelled like coffee and disinfectant. My son slept with his mouth open, lashes too long for his face, bruises blooming quietly along his arm. I checked the chat again. Still nothing. At noon a photo popped up. Then another. My niece at a birthday brunch, sunlight on her face, balloons in the background. Smiles. A caption with confetti emojis. The chat woke up all at once, laughter and hearts spilling down the screen like we hadn't said anything at all. No one came. I put the phone face down and focused on practical things. Water, ice chips, the way to make hospital pillows do what you ask. My son asked if Grandma knew we'd been in an accident. I said yes. The word tasted strange, like a promise I couldn't guarantee. Hours later, a doctor explained next steps, his voice calm and exact. I nodded and asked the right questions. I've always been the reliable one. The one who listens, who doesn't make scenes, who handles logistics when emotions get messy. The label settled over me the way it always does. That evening the room dimmed. Outside the window traffic crawled, red lights bleeding into white. I checked the chat one more time then muted it. Silence can be a tool if you let it. We were discharged late. I tucked my son into bed at home, helped him sip water, kissed his forehead until he slept. The house smelled like cold air and clean sheets. I sat on the edge of my bed and finally let my shoulders drop. 3 days passed. On the 4th morning my phone lit up like a warning sign. Missed calls stacked so tightly I couldn't see the wallpaper behind them. 48, all from different names that shared my blood. Then one message from my dad, heavy with urgency. Answer now. We need you. I stared at it until my breathing slowed. I thought about the blue bubble in the hospital. About brunch photos. About an 11-year-old who learned something he didn't need to learn yet. I answered. And I listened. My dad didn't start with concern. He started with logistics. His voice was clipped, efficient, the way it gets when he's already decided what the right answer should be. He said there had been a problem. He said it was serious. He said the family needed help and they needed it now. The word now carried weight, like it always had, like it was supposed to reorder my priorities on contact. I listened without interrupting, staring at the crack in the wall above my dresser, the one I'd been meaning to fix. He talked about timelines and costs and how things had spiraled faster than anyone expected. He said my sister was overwhelmed. He said my mother hadn't slept. He said everyone was scared. He didn't ask how my son was. When he finally paused, I heard my own breathing for the first time. Slow. Even. The kind of calm that arrives after something inside you has already made a decision. I asked him if he'd seen my message. There was a beat, just long enough to tell the truth had been considered and then set aside. He said yes. He said he'd assumed we were fine because we hadn't said otherwise. He said they'd been tied up with the birthday brunch and hadn't wanted to overreact. Overreact. The word landed and stayed. A memory drifted in, soft and unwelcome. Me at 9, sick with a fever, lying on the couch while preparations for a party continued around me. Being told to drink water and rest so I wouldn't make it a thing. I'd learned early how to be quiet about pain. I told my dad we'd been hit by a drunk driver. I said the airbags deployed. I said my son had nightmares for 2 nights straight. I said I'd typed alive, but shaken because I didn't know how else to say I needed you without sounding dramatic. There was silence on the line. In the background I heard a television and the clink of ice in a glass. Normal sounds. A different room. A different urgency. He cleared his throat and said he was sorry. The apology sounded practiced, like something he'd say to close a loop. Then he moved on. He said the emergency couldn't wait. He said this was bigger than feelings. He said family shows up. I thought about the hospital corridor at midnight. The way my son's fingers curled into the blanket. The blue bubble sitting alone in the chat while confetti emojis multiplied. Showing up, I realized, had been defined for me without my consent. I told him I could help with information. Calls. Paperwork. I told him I wouldn't be rearranging my finances or my life on short notice. My voice didn't rise. I didn't justify. I stated limits like coordinates. He reacted the way people do when a door they assumed was unlocked doesn't open. Surprise first. Then irritation. He asked what had gotten into me. He said this wasn't like me. I almost laughed. The reliable one isn't supposed to change. That's the whole point of relying on her. I repeated myself. Fully. Hurry. I said my son came first. I said emergencies don't erase neglect. I said I wasn't punishing anyone. I was choosing what I could sustain. My phone buzzed with texts while he talked. My mom now, my sister and aunt. The circle closing in. I let it ring. When the call ended, my hands were still steady. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house. Pipes ticking, a car passing, my son's soft breathing through the wall. I felt tired but aligned. For the first time, their urgency didn't become my command. And I knew the hardest part wasn't the no I'd just said. It was what would come when they realized it wasn't temporary. The pressure didn't ease. It changed shape. By the next morning, the messages were longer, softer, threaded with explanations instead of demands. My mom wrote about stress and misunderstandings. My sister sent a voice note, her tone carefully gentle, saying she hadn't seen the message in time, saying brunch had been loud, saying she assumed someone else would respond. Everyone assumed. That was the problem. I listened to the voice note while standing at the sink, rinsing a mug I hadn't finished. The water ran too hot. Steam fogged the window. I let it, then turned the handle down and watched the glass clear again. Control is often just noticing what you can adjust. A memory drifted in while the message played. Me at 12, waiting on a bench after practice because rides got mixed up. The coach had waited with me until it got dark, then called home himself. I'd been told later that I should have spoken up sooner. I'd learned to anticipate neglect and manage around it. I didn't reply. Instead, I took my son to his follow-up appointment. The clinic smelled like sanitizer and old magazines. He answered questions with the seriousness kids use when they're trying to be brave. When the nurse asked if we had family support, I hesitated, then said we were managing. The truth doesn't always fit the box. That afternoon my dad called again. His voice had lost its edge. He sounded tired now, uncertain. He asked if I was angry. The question surprised me, not because it was wrong but because it missed the point. I told him I wasn't angry. I told him I was paying attention. He asked what that meant. I told him it meant I noticed who shows up without being asked. It meant I noticed who needs reminders and who needs silence. It meant I noticed that when my son and I were hit by a drunk driver, no one paused their plans. And that when they needed me, the world was suddenly supposed to stop. There was a long quiet on the line. Then he said carefully that things had escalated. He said money was tight. He said they were counting on me to bridge the gap like I always had. He didn't say please. He said counting. I realized then that this wasn't about the emergency alone. It was about a system that had worked because I never failed it. The moment I did, even briefly, it exposed how fragile it was. I repeated my offer. Calls. Research. Logistics. I said no to money again. I said no to urgency dictating access to me. My voice stayed even. I felt like I was reading coordinates off a map I'd finally learned to trust. After we hung up, the extended family chimed in. Gentle nudges at first, then sharper ones. To your parents. This isn't the time to bring up the past. You're strong, you can handle it. The reliable one translated into obligation. I sent one reply to the group and muted it. We're focusing on recovery. I'm helping in ways I can sustain. That evening, I sat on the floor of my son's room while he built something elaborate out of blocks, narrating each step. The lamp cast a soft circle of light. Outside, a siren passed and faded. He asked if everything was okay. I said yes because in that moment it was. Later, alone, I opened my calendar and looked at the next few weeks. Appointments. Work. Therapy sessions I'd scheduled for him and one for me. I added boundaries the way you add meetings. Deliberately with reminders. By nightfall, the messages slowed. Not because the need had vanished but because the route to me had changed. I understood then what had truly shifted. They hadn't lost my love. They'd lost my automatic compliance. And once that's gone, everyone has to learn a new language. The emergency didn't end quickly. It just stopped leaning on me to hold it up. Over the next week, the calls became less frantic and more deliberate. My parents figured out alternatives they'd sworn didn't exist. Insurance appeals pushed through, a short-term loan approved, a plan rearranged around reality instead of assumption. My dad's voice changed when he updated me. Slower. Careful. He didn't sound stunned anymore. He sounded recalibrated. My mom called once in the afternoon, her tone unfamiliar. She asked how my son was doing. Really asked. She waited for the answer instead of filling the space. I told her about the nightmares easing, about the bruises fading yellow at the edges. She said she was sorry for not coming. She didn't explain why. He just said she was sorry. I let that land where it could. I stayed involved on my terms. I forwarded numbers. I made a call or two during lunch. I did not open my wallet. I did not rush. The line held clean and visible and no one crossed it. One evening my dad admitted something he'd never said out loud. He said they'd assumed I could handle anything because I always had. He said they mistook that for permission. He didn't ask me to reassure him. He sat with the silence that followed. That mattered. If you've ever been the one who quietly keeps everything moving, you know how invisible that work becomes. Until it stops. Some families don't notice your absence. They notice the gap it leaves. A month later, I found the hospital bracelet in my coat pocket. Plastic creased, my name printed in block letters. I held it for a moment and then threw it away. Not because it didn't matter. Because it had already taught me what I needed to learn. My son slept through the night again. I slept too. The house smelled like clean sheets and coffee in the morning. Ordinary returned but with a different spine. I still love my family. I just don't mistake need for entitlement anymore. I answer when I can. I say no when I must. I choose steadiness over urgency, presence over performance. They expected me to pick up and fix everything. What they got instead was a boundary that held. My silence became my line.